Hi, I'm Tom Hamilton, and welcome to the Lewis A. Moran Reforestation Center and their new LT70 Super Hydraulic Sawmill. Today, we're going to be going over the tips and tricks for setting up and using this awesome sawmill to make nice, beautiful lumber. And we're going to be making a whole bunch of different cuts depending on what sort of project you want to accomplish. But before we get started, we got to make sure we do our regular maintenance on the sawmill. One of the biggest parts of maintenance is making sure everything is properly lubricated. And we're going to be using ATF, oh boy, that's reverse. And we're going to be pumping grease into Zerk fittings. Any surface that has a rail that's going to be moved on needs to be wiped clean and then lubricated with ATF. So right now we're getting the dust off, and then we're going to wipe on the ATF on this rail here. You'll want to lubricate and clean the blade guide arm. And it also helps to lubricate these rails where the whole carriage goes up and down. Also, under the carriage is this little felt pad. You can unscrew it on both sides and pick it up. And this felt pad needs to be well saturated with ATF. So how much ATF do you put in here? Like that. Oh yeah, let it really get saturated. Don't be shy. If you ever feel like you need to do a quick refill, you can also put ATF into these little holes here. But that's only if it's feeling really shaky and the carriage is not moving well. Any hydraulics that also has a joint is also going to have a Zerk fitting. You'll want to find all of these, and every once in a while, give it a little extra lithium grease with this Zerk one. Here's one here. There's one over there. Don't forget this one. Here's one here and here. This one's right on the edge. Don't forget that guy. We found about 8 Zerk fittings. Can you find more? Now that the sawmill is nice and lubricated, we need to tension the blade. And we can tell how tense the blade is by looking at this meter. The base level should be at 80 without any pumps, and then you want to get it to a PSI of 85. So you'll release this clip here, and then you'll pump this until the gauge reads 85. There's 75. There's 80, and there's 85. Now we'll put this up, set the little clip in, we're ready to go. One last thing to check before we get started is that you have a full tank of diesel and you have a full tank of lubricant. This lubricant is filled with water and either a mix of vegetable glycerol, which you might have in stock, but if that's not available, Dawn soap works really well, and give it a nice, generous few squirts. Now we're ready to get started. But first, make sure you have your data log. This log keeps track of a few pieces of data that we need to keep track of in order to know what's in our inventory. We get our date, the hours it starts, which is located right here. We want to know who is doing the sawing, what number log it is that we've cut, and then we're going to have an identifier, which is the species, for example, euc for eucalyptus, mole for mulberry, and then a log in an identifier. This is our second eucalyptus log. We want to know the length of the log, the diameter on the large and small end of the log, what sort of milling we're going to be doing, which is mostly slabs, what are our nominal thicknesses, and how many boards we ended up getting. You'll also add some little extra notes. Maybe you gave one of the boards to somebody, maybe you found a giant hill of ants in it, but we want to keep track of all this data so we know what's in our inventory and how the saw was working. When setting up the sawmill, make sure your connection is done from there and put in right there. If you want, there's even another connection on this side of the sawmill if for some reason you wanted to control your settings from this side, which would give you a lot more visibility on each side of the log. But for the most part, you'll be over on this side, and if you ever feel the need, like you need to have better visibility, you can always pick this thing up and move it off to the side. Just make sure that you've got another assistant with you that can keep an eye on your blind spots when cutting a log. Turning on the saw is pretty straightforward. You can't operate any of the hydraulics or move the sawmill itself until you've turned the engine on all the way. We'll do like here. We've got 2 sets of joysticks that do the majority of our controls, and each joystick has 2 upper buttons, a D-pad with 4 directions, a bottom button, and on the back side, a trigger. When you start the sawmill, you'll be in head mode. There are 2 different modes when you're operating the sawmill. One that controls all of the actions for the carriage, and one that controls all the actions for the bed. To switch between carriage and bed mode, you need to click the trigger on the left joystick. you click the trigger and you will change from carriage to head mode. When in head mode, you can move the carriage forward and backward by pressing forward and backward on the right joystick. When going in reverse, it wants to go faster and it may even not stop all the way, but if it's going backwards out of control, you can press forward again to stop it in its tracks. To move the sawmill up and down in head mode, you just use the left joystick. Hold back to go up, hold forward to go down. And you can see exactly where your blade is in reference to the bed of the carriage by this number right here. This motor right here is called the debarker. And if you have a log that has a lot of bark or it has a lot of dirt on it, it may help extend the blade's life by using the debarker. You can move the debarker left and right by using the D-pad on the left controller. That moves to the right, and the debarker moves to the right, left, and to the left. In order to actually run the debarker, though, you have to activate it by pressing here. And it will turn on and run only when the sawmill is in motion. And then you can manually control it to fit to the contour of the log. You want to keep your blade cool and slippery. So you'll want to make sure that your Lumbercycle is always activated. The Lumbercycle only works when the saw is on and you're moving in a forward direction. Otherwise, the Lumbercycle won't turn on. To control how much water is coming out of the Lumbercycle, you use this dial to go back and forth from using the Lumbercycle settings, and this is the feed settings. I can go over to the Lumbercycle settings, click this button, and then I can have full control over how much water I want to be coming out of the Lumbercycle. I like to keep it on a lot just because we're using a lot of sticky material like pine and eucalyptus. This is the blade guide arm. You want to make sure that your blade guide arm is always as close to the cut as possible. And you can control that by using the left and right D-pad on your right controller when in head mode. While you're running the saw, it's always good to keep in control of your blade guide arm to make sure that the blade is not flexing up and down. The further apart it is, the more opportunity that that blade can move up or down. We don't want that. When running the sawmill forward and reverse, you can control the speed with this right here on the right-hand side, right there. And you can control the max speed by highlighting it, clicking with this button, and then controlling it like that. Notice how this will control the max speed. So here at this max speed, the sawmill moves that fast. If I was to increase my max speed, well then what do you know? The sawmill starts zooming forward as fast as can be. You want to set a healthy maximum speed so that you're not going too quickly through the log and putting too much stress on the blade and the sawmill engine. So I like to keep my sawmill's max speed around here. And if you need to adjust it to go a little bit faster, you can always do that mid-cut in cruise control mode. Now let's go into bed mode. By clicking the trigger on the left joystick, we've now activated bed mode. Now we're in control of all the hydraulics that are on the bed. And this is really important. We want to make sure that our fence is always up, whether we're using the hydraulic fence or the manual fence. The hydraulic fence is lifted up by pulling back on the left trigger, pulling back. If I want to push it down, I push forward. When I pull it all the way up, you'll notice that the log lifter will start to come up as well. Using the log lifters for rotating the log in a clockwise or counterclockwise direction. And you can control that by going left and right on the left trigger or on the left joystick. When I press the left, it rotates it counterclockwise. When I do it to the right, it rotates clockwise, and reverse for the actual log. If I'm using a log that is not long enough to span between the two hydraulic posts, I can also use my manual posts to make sure that the log does not fall over the side and hurt the precious cargo over here. If we have a log that has a large taper in it, we might want to level the pith to make sure that we're getting clean and consistent cuts with no grain runoff, and we can trap the pith in the center board and remove it if we need to. In order to control the toe boards, which are right here and one on the back, we need to press the bottom button on the left joystick, and that will act as a shift that, while moving the joystick to the left and right, will raise, moving to the left raises the closest toe board to us, moving it to the right raises the back toe board. In order to bring the toe boards down, you can then use these two buttons on the top to lower them one at a time. Or if you have both of them up and you want both of them to come down quickly, you can just press down on the D-pad and both will come down together. On the left joystick, without pressing the shift button, you can also press left and right to raise and lower the log lifter. Look at that. So if you want to load a log with your PVs on the floor, you can lower it all the way down, load the log with your PV, and then slowly lift it over, making sure, of course, that you have your fence up. Always have your fence up and your clamp out of the way when you're lifting a log onto the bed, just like that. After cutting the log, I like to keep my log loader about halfway. That way I can push material and waste material off from the side and have it land there so it can be loaded and I can keep cutting the next log. When using our right joystick, that controls our clamp. Going back with the joystick will raise the clamp up. Pushing forward will raise it down. And going left and right will control the power of our clamp. You don't need to have a super strong clamp on there. Just give the log a good shake test to make sure that it's not going to wiggle and vibrate out of the clamp. When you're ready to load a log, you have a couple of options. Number one, you can have a handy-dandy certified forklift operator like these two loaded on by forklift onto the bed of your truck. But if that is not available, you can also use PVs to roll them onto the carriage and then use the carriage to lift it on there for you. The most important thing about loading a log is making sure that you have it lined up so that it fits with our awesome fence posts. If it's not, then things are gonna fly off. We wanna make sure we have ample pressure. Using a PV is really easy. Get that hook, bite it in, and use leverage to rotate that log over and onto the log carriage. Wow! So here we are about to load a log. I'm gonna go into bed mode with my left trigger, and I'm gonna make sure that my fence posts are all the way up, but not my log shifter. Then I'm going to, with the left joystick, press to the left, and the log will slowly start to lift. Once I get it all the way over, the fence post should stop it. Now I can load it into place. Now we're going to use our right joystick in bed mode to lift our clamp up, push it into place. Now we're going to collect the log data. I'm putting the date, and today is a leap year. I'm going to put the hours, which is 372.1. Milled by yours truly. This is log number 8. We're gonna be milling a pine. So this will be pine 001. Can't film right. We've got about 18 inches on the big side, 15 inches on the small side. So now we need to level the pith and the log. And you can tell that there's a slope that goes from up here down to here. We can try and level this log by doing that visual inspection, but sometimes you'll have a tree that's been leaning and you'll have a pith that is not in the center of the log. Let's take a look at this log for an example. On this side, we have a crotch, and we're just gonna have to try and pick one of these piths to work with. Now, I'm gonna try and aim for the center of this one, which I found is about 10 inches is what I'm gonna aim for. Even though that's below this pith, it's also above this pith. When making this reference, you can either use your bed on top of this metal surface, or you can reference off of the frame. This frame is the same as the frame on this side, and this bed is the same as the bed on this side. So I had 10 inches on that side. On this side, I'm sporting about 8 inches. So, concurrent with our visual inspection, it would appear like I need to raise this side up by about 1.5 inches, because as I raise this will come down a little bit. So now I'm going to activate this toe board to raise this side and then make my initial cut. Now I'm going to turn on the engine, go into bed mode with the left trigger, and I'm going to lift the toe board by pressing this bottom button as a shift and rotating my stick to the right or left to raise that toe board. Now I've got it raised up and I can re-clamp it. The last thing I'm gonna do before I start my cut is give it the old shake test. And I wanna make sure that my fence posts are about a little less than halfway the height of the log. I wanna try and at least get halfway through this log so that by the time I rotate it and put it flat on the bed, that I'll have something that'll reference against these little fence posts and it doesn't slide off. Because the more round curvature you have by cutting higher up, the more likely it is to just jump over those little fence posts. Now we're ready to make our first cut. So I'm gonna make sure that I'm in head mode so that I control the forward motion of the carriage. I'm gonna have my Lumbercycle on. Let's try using our debarker too, why not? And then we're going to make our first cut. Now in order to make our first cut, you're going to eyeball how much waste you wanna have from this first cut. So I'm looking here and I wanna be slightly above this log, and then I can start making flat cuts below that. So that's where I'm gonna start my cut. Once I've completely gotten through the cut, I make sure I turn the blade off before I try bringing the blade back. Now, in order to bring the blade back, I'm going to lift it up using the left joystick. I'm going to pull back on the right joystick to bring it all the way back. And then I can reset my cut. Now I can have two of my helpers help remove the waste, and then once they're completely out of the way, begin my second cut. Now that we've got these first cuts done, we're gonna clean both faces with a brush or with a sticker and start preparing it for drying. Then we're going to flip the log upside down, make sure the toe boards are completely down, and then finish our cuts. Oh my God, it is cold and windy today. Now I want to rotate my log and start cutting from the other way. So I'm going to click my trigger and go to bed mode. When I lift this, I'll bring my fence all the way up, and now that'll bring my log lifter up. Make sure your clamp is good and out of the way. I lift the log lifter up. Now when I rotate this, I can slowly but surely, and really take your time, there's no rush, let it flip, and once it has, you can bring it down, lower it some more. Now that it's on the floor, you can bring it all the way down and finally clamp it into place over here. Now, when I'm doing my final clamping, I can keep this really low so that it's making a pinch point between the clamp and those little tiny fence posts that are on this side. Because I'm cutting pine, you'll often find that there's a buildup of residue on the blade. You want to prevent that as much as possible. And so what I like to do is while running the sawmill and having the Lumbercycle totally on, you can run this wire brush over the top while it's producing the lube, and that can often get it nice and clean. I'll show you what that looks like right now. Like I said before, the Lumbercycle won't actually turn on unless the engine is running and we've got the blade on and it's in the forward moving position. So how can we have it in the forward moving position without moving the actual head? Because I don't want to chase it. And you can do that by setting your feed speed to 0. Click on this, highlight it, bring it down to 0. And then when we are running it, we can go into cruise control mode by pressing forward on this and then clicking this top button. With this going forward, we'll set the speed and have it be in cruise control mode. When I'm pushing through a log, I like to use cruise control mode. And when I need to clean the blade, then I will definitely put the speed to 0, press this forward, hit cruise control, then I can go with the Lumbercycle running and clean the blade. So here we go. Our speed setting is down to 0. I press the blade on. Our log flipped, and now I want to make all of my references off of the bed up. I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna click the pattern setting. And here we can adjust our patterns by how thick of a cut we wanna make. I wanna make some 2-inch cuts. Do I have any settings here for 2 inches? I do. 2B has three 2-inch cuts and then a bunch of 1¼ inch cuts. Now that I have that set, as soon as I click the trigger, it's going to move down to hit the exact spots that I want it to hit. Of course, you have to be in head mode for this. There you go. Click it, and look at that. I'm clicking the trigger, it's moving down in those exact sequences. By looking at that, now I can see when I reach a sequence that'll give me a proper amount of waste, then I can start right there and then continue my cuts from there. So I'm gonna start here to get this waste off and then take it all the way to my last cut, which will be 2 inches. Once you've got everything properly dusted off, you'll want to make sure you get it prepared for drying. We want to make sure that our ends are no more than 6 inches from the end with our stickers. Our dunnage, we have the same amount of dunnage as we do with our stickers, which all line up. Just like that. Make sure you've labeled each one with the proper identifier. This one's Pine 001, and this is board number 5. And once we're completely finished, we'll mark on our inventory how many boards we got total out of this. So remember to keep track of what you're cutting. Remember some of the simple basics, rotating between head mode and bed mode, understanding what all there's no laser, so don't worry about that. But we'll always make sure our Lumbercycle's on, our debarker only if we want to use it. This is how we turn the blade on, right here and right here. We want to make sure that we're using our auto up and auto down features when we're first beginning with our log, and then we could switch over to our pattern mode. If you need to make adjustments on pattern mode, you can always go to the settings, which is right here. You go down to auto mode settings, and you can adjust everything from here. If we wanted to go to pattern settings, and let's say we wanted to make 1D be all 2 inches. I'll go to the bottom. I'll make my adjustment to 2. We're gonna press our button here. Everything turns to 2. We save it. We'll escape. And now when I go back, I can reference easily that my 1D should be all 2 inches. What do you know? Click on pattern, go to 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, and we have all 2 inches. We can use that as our reference. Once you're all done cutting, you better make sure you clean the sawmill. Yeah. Oh dear God.